Welcome back to another 3D character sculpting video. I am Follygon, and in this video I'm going to show you my entire character creation process from beginning to end. Click that subscribe button if you're new around here, and check out the links in the description for my courses, tutorials, and my custom brushes. And if you want to learn how to do everything in this video, check out the Appeal Academy. That is my online program where I teach you every single thing I know about creating appealing characters. In this video, I'm going to be sculpting an original character of my own creation. I've been experimenting with my own stuff a lot lately, and this is going to be more of that. During the early part of the process of what is called the block out, it makes this stage a lot more difficult. Normally, I have a really specific direction that I'm heading in, and I know the general larger shapes that I need to create, but when I'm experimenting like I'm doing here, I kind of just fall into old habits. And a lot of the time, a lot of my old habits can look pretty bad. So I try to head in a direction and try to pick out the good, keep some of the good, and leave out some of the bad. Now, for this character, I did have a specific direction that I wanted to head into. I wanted to create something a little creepy, a little ghoulish. So that was kind of my general prompt that I had for myself. I wasn't sure about like specifics of colors or, some of the other decisions that I made along the way. I'm pretty happy with the way the character turned out for a short experiment, and I think it would be fun to do something like this again in the future, to keep experimenting with my own art. I really enjoy creating original characters. I know I'm kind of known for the whole 2D to 3D thing, but creating my own work is something that's always been a dream of mine, and something that I, of course, want to get better at. I always say that concepting characters is a skill that exists completely separate from the art of actually drawing or sculpting or painting or whatever you like to do to create your characters. And, I still believe that that is true in all the years that I've been creating art. You can be a really amazing sculptor and not really great at coming up with original characters and concepting. And I feel like that's a little bit where I am right now, and I'm trying to obviously improve and get better at that. For those that are here and are completely unfamiliar with digital sculpting in its entirety, I'm using the software ZBrush. I'm working on a large Cintiq graphics tablet. I have it right here in front of me. With a digital pen, and I sculpt directly on my screen. I have a host of different brushes that I use that you can, of course, see here at the bottom of the screen. I have this UI heavily customized with all sorts of hotkeys, pop-up menus, and all sorts of different things. But I don't really use a ton of different stuff in the software. I keep my toolset pretty limited. So, I really, you see all these different brushes and tools in 3D software. I probably use like 4 or 5 for the most part. And then, I'll grab one here or there for like a really specific instance if it's needed. But in terms of the general process here for digital sculpting, after I've kind of blocked out the shapes that I've created, which is kind of where I'm at right now with this character, I need to start making some hard decisions. And you can see I just entered into a little tool there called Transpose Master. This allows me to manipulate all of my objects, or what are called subtools here in ZBrush, at the same time. The reason why this is important is because once you have all these stuff in place, like your lips and your eyes and nose, etc., you need to start manipulating those and working on proportions, shape, language, and the overall feel of your character. Because I was going for something a little more ghoulish or ghosty, I definitely wanted to make the character feel a little more gaunt. So you can see in terms of shape language with the character's eyes, they have these really deep eye sockets that I exaggerate even more. Now you can see me going in and beginning to add some paint to the eyes. I'll add some more paint to the character here in a moment. You've often probably heard me, if you've been here for a while, talk about how adding paint to your character is incredibly important, and you might be wondering, well, hey, Follygon, why aren't you adding paint to your character? And that is because I was still working on the forms. Paint can kind of help you figure out the direction of your character, but if you want to focus on form, paint can almost certainly get in the way. For those that are familiar with 2D art, And painting, when you're working on values, color can kind of get in the way, and it's a similar idea here in 3D. So that is why I have not added any color to my character yet. I'm still trying to work out some of these forms, figure out the direction. You can see a lot of these hard edges, which I'm very known for, especially during the early stages of my characters. These can be helpful to figure out what are called plane changes. So front, side, top, etc. Think of your face like a box. It can be helpful for figuring out those areas. But here on this face, you'll notice that it can kind of age a face a lot. With this character in particular, it's a little okay because that's kind of the vibe that I'm going for, but you will see that I do go over top of a lot of this information and smooth it out still. So hard edges can be cool, they can be helpful. They tend to look a little mechanical, a little more like robotic. You can definitely give it an organic vibe. There are definitely a lot of artists that I have seen do that successfully, but it's pretty difficult. So now I'm going in and softening up a lot of these shapes. The objective here is not to smooth too much or so much that you alleviate those forms entirely. It's all about finding balance at this stage. So you still want a little bit of turn to an edge to a form, but not so much that it feels like this really just completely inorganic or unbelievable shape. And that's how you create these really believable forms that, even though they are super unrealistic in terms of proportion, you end up with something that still feels believable. And this is, like I said, a really difficult balance to strike, and it's something that definitely comes with experience and practice. There's not one tip I could probably give that would, make that super easy for you to do or make you immediately better. One thing that you could potentially focus on would be to avoid making a stroke that is the same thickness throughout. So kind of like with a pencil, when you start your brush stroke or pencil stroke, whatever you want to call it, you don't want to go like hard all the way through. You kind of want to fade it out and get some quality to your stroke. Similar thing here in 3D. Then with the hair, I'm going in and adding on top of my base set of geometry. So I'm adding in with the curve tube snap brush, and I'm just adding in these simple tubes of geometry. You can see I'm going back over top of those, manipulating them, stylizing them, sharpening them up, adjusting their form, all the things to improve and start to push this into a more cohesive direction. Something that is really important that I've mentioned with hair before is that when creating these kinds of shapes, it's really easy to go overboard and do way too many of them. It starts to look a little like spaghetti, so I think that, in my opinion, less is more when you are going for sculpted hair. Obviously, there are clear exceptions to that. You can look at, really old classical sculpture that has a ton of detail and information in it. But that is very time-consuming and very difficult. And for something that is a little bit of a shorter project, which was around 2-ish hours for this character, maybe 2.5, I didn't want to spend a ton of time working on the hair, so I keep it pretty sketchy. Secondary forms are the act of taking a primary form and adding form on top of that, and that is what I'm adding here to my hair. I use a couple different brushes for this kind of general process. A lot of the time you'll see me use my clay brush when I'm working on a face, on hair, or whatever. This is a brush that I use mainly to add and subtract form, and I use that for a ton of different stuff, not just, hair. Like I said, the face, you just saw me using it there on the character's neck. I will use this literally anywhere and everywhere. And then in combination with my sharp soft brush, it can create a really nice flow to an organic form like hair. Another brush that I get asked about a lot is the mech brush that I'm using. It's essentially a pinch brush and a Damien standard brush, or a carve-in brush, whatever you want to call it, kind of smushed together. So it pinches and it carves at the same time, and it can kind of do the opposite effect there. It's a very powerful brush. You'll see me using that a lot here as we progress forward and I figure out some more shapes and refine some forms. But now it's time to move on to creating clothing, and my biggest piece of advice when creating clothing is to repurpose what you already have on your canvas. So repurposing your geometry is really important, and you're gonna see exactly how important it is here with this character as I go through and create a lot of different layers for this fabric. So I repurposed the general sphere for the body. I repurposed the neck, and then I combine a lot of that. You can see I got some different shapes going on there for the shoulder area, which is going to turn into a more kind of flowy round sleeve. You can see I'm continuing to block out some anatomical form here for the chest, inserting some spheres onto the front portion of the torso, and then I will go ahead and combine those, blend those together, and treat this as one larger form for the portion of the clothing. Trying to create a little bit more form here for the bottom of the torso, figuring out exactly how I'm going to terminate that. When creating a character bust, I think an interesting problem is often how to terminate that form, how you're going to kind of create that floating piece. Classical sculpture, you would have it on a stand. Here in 3D, it's always floating, so we don't need to worry about gravity unless we're going to be printing this. An interesting problem, and I'll maybe touch on that more as we continue forward. Now I'm starting to add in some geometry for the arms and continue to think about this clothing and figure out exactly what I want to do. Clothing is one of those things that's really fun because there's just a lot you can do. There's a lot that you can experiment with. I think there's just so much variety there that there are endless possibilities for you to continue to experiment and grow as an artist. Now I'm adding on some more geometry to the torso because I'm not exactly sure how I want to terminate that, and I'm not exactly sure how much form I'm going to need for the clothing that I'm creating. So a couple spheres just pulled out, a few brush strokes on top, mainly using my clay brush to just build up a few different areas, and then I'm off back to working on the arms. I don't really like to work in one area all too long because I find that it gets your eyes get, I should say, a little stagnant, meaning that you're kind of looking at one area a little too long and you get used to all the mistakes. So I find that by jumping around a lot, you get to see a lot more of what you're kind of leaving in that could be better. Some more folds here for the sleeves, again using my sharp soft brush to create that form in terms of the pull out and push in, and then I'm just using a basic move brush to adjust. Again, repurposing clothing here by just simply chopping off or duplicating then chopping off what I don't want, and then cleaning up with Z-Remesher and a couple other tools to make the geometry a little more clean. It's not going to give you anything that's animation ready by any means. Sometimes it might, if you're really lucky. But for the most part, it's just a nice tool to create some quick, clean edge flow, and that's exactly what I use it for here. Now, this clothing had a lot of layers going on, so that's why I hopped into Transpose Master to work on everything at the same time. Again, that is a tool that allows you to manipulate all your objects or subtools at the same time, and it's a very helpful, powerful tool. If you have not used it before, I highly recommend it. I use it at pretty much all steps of my workflow. Now I'm beginning to add on some materials and color. I'm using my classic Zebro paint material that I use for just about everything, and then I'm adding in just some random colors that I thought would look nice. Tried out some white hair, some white eyebrows. I actually experimented with a lot of different colors for the hair and eyebrows in terms of combination, but everything felt really awkward, so I simply ended up sticking with the very first thing I tried. Rarely do I get things right on the first try, but this was definitely one of those times. I wanted the face to feel really pale, but obviously it still needed some variation. When everything's just one color, it's really boring. So typically when I paint, I like to overpaint a lot. This is an idea where you exaggerate your paint, much like you would exaggerate your sculpted forms and then kind of fade them back. But this time around, I kept things really subtle from the beginning and kind of played with that subtlety a little bit. So that's not normally the process that I would take when sculpting, but it worked out really well here, and I was kind of liking, once again, my first push on this paint job. So it was heading in a good direction, and I was pretty happy with it, so I kept it and didn't really experiment with it too much beyond what you can see here. I do clean it up, as with everything. I mentioned earlier I like to jump around a lot, so I'll be moving on to some other aspects like the clothing and hair, but I'll always be coming back to continue to push on and work on the character's face. Surprisingly, up to this point, and I'm not quite sure how I did this, but the character looks fairly good without eyelashes. It is very rare that I think a character looks good without eyelashes, a little more true for masculine characters, but eyelashes really help to frame the face. Eyelashes and eyebrows in particular, both of those do a really good job of creating emotion and not making a face look dead. And when they are not there, something feels off and you can't necessarily put your finger on it. So you can sit there and tweak and adjust as much as you want, but oftentimes until you put on some eyelashes and eyebrows, things won't start to feel correct. Then I'm using a custom insert brush that I have here that I got a while ago to create the additional form for the eyelashes. I wanted to experiment with these, try one with a little more form, and instead of going through and inserting a bunch of curve tube brushes one by one, I thought I would just use this brush, insert a bunch at the same time, and use that to kind of progress forward a little more fast. Next, moving on to the lower portion of the eyes, creating that sunken in feel. That was something that I wanted to experiment with a lot more, as well as just the general proportion of the face. In my opinion, this section of the face, it's kind of the cheekbone area along with the transition between the front and side plane of the face, tends to be one of the most difficult areas to work on. At least it is for me. This is where a lot of the volume of your character's face is decided. It's also where a lot of the shape language and general proportion of your face can be altered. Especially when you're looking at a face from like the 3/4 view, because it gives a lot of information about that cheekbone and how far out that is, how round it is, and even small tweaks there can give quite a drastic change to the read of your character. If you watch any of my videos, or if you go back and watch any of my videos where I'm working on the face, you'll see me spend probably like 50% of my time just in that area, if not more. So a very difficult part of the face, but I think a few small tweaks here ended up pushing the character's face here into an even better direction. So starting to deepen that area, sharpen up, and pull out that cheek just a little more for a little extra volume was starting to push things into a direction that I was really happy with. Now, of course, it's time to move on to a quick pose for the character. For this, I'm just going to do a simple tilt down for the head and a little bit of twist, just to kind of create a more melancholy feel, something that feels, a little ethereal, and also, of course, just to avoid like the deadpan stare forward. I did a couple experiments recently with characters where I didn't pose them. I was mainly just focusing on the creation process, and there is definitely something to be said for that kind of work, but in my opinion, it's not too much work to even do something like what I'm doing here, where it's just a really simple pose here at the end. It's a really quick polish, can add a lot to a character. Just a simple head tilt, twist, whatever. A little bit of asim goes a long way. So keep that in mind for presentation for those that are working on their own characters. Sometimes having that deadpan stare forward isn't for the best. The eyes were looking a little too warm. I wanted to make them feel more cool, more bluish, so I played around with their color. Gave them a little bit of some twist, simply because they are not perfect spheres. I've pulled out the lens slightly for the eye. And then finally here I go through and adjust some slight asymmetry for the character's face and body. Very minor things, mainly working with the area of the eyebrow and the lips. Again, eyes and the mouth being the most expressive part of the face, it's really important that you spend a lot of time and attention and, of course, patience in these areas. And here at the end of the entire process, I like to go back over top of everything else. This is what I call polishing. And it simply means kind of retouching on every single subtool, making sure, it's not perfect, but there's not any weird little things that you left out, or if there's anything that you were like, hey, I wanted to try this, I wanted to experiment with that, you have some time to do it here during this stage. So that's what I'm doing here, starting off with the hair. There were definitely a lot of areas that I saw kind of sticking out to me that needed some adjustments. So after that, a little bit of paint change, a little bit of a couple asim adjustments to a few areas. I'm going to call this character done. And now for the part that everybody skips to, of course, not the final renders this time, but just a simple turnaround or turntable here in ZBrush. Click that like and subscribe button if you are new around here, and if you did just so happen to skip here to the end and you like what you see, I think you'll also really enjoy learning more about the process of how this character was made. And if you'd like to learn more about digital sculpting, check out the Appeal Academy, my online program that includes an ever-expanding massive library of videos on everything I know about creating 3D characters. And for individual tutorials, my custom brushes, and other cool stuff like Mod Mesh, check out my Gumroad link below. Thanks so much for watching, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video.